because it's taking advantage of people. In this scenario, it's deception because from what I can read in the scenario, the kids weren't made aware that they would be needing to wear swimsuits, and it came to a surprise to them when they arrived to do the test. This would obviously be significantly psychologically damaging for any participant that is deceived. The consequences for the researcher would be the same that I mentioned for no subject preparation. So this is scenario 2. So the evaluation of scenario 2. So unfortunately, scenario 2 shows no good practice, as there are multiple unethical and illegal actions that appear throughout the overview of the research. I've picked out and will go through 4 key bits of poor practice demonstrated by the researcher. Firstly, there is no first aid procedure. This is shown from when a participant slipped off the treadmill and consequently twisted his knee, but the researcher didn't know where a first aid kit was. A huge part of research is ensuring there is a full control over the health and safety of the participants. Even if a researcher feels like they have all health and safety hazards covered, they should always have a first aid kit which is easily accessible, just in case of an emergency. If no incident was to happen, then great, but if something was to happen, then the researcher will be able to use the first aid kit to help managing the incident, instead of just telling them to run it underwater. So as a result of not having a first aid kit, it meant that the client would have to deal with their discomfort and pain, not having something like an ice pack, which could be found in a first aid kit, which could help to manage the pain. Consequence of the researcher is that they might need to have a medical supervisor to ensure nothing like this will happen again, or they could be called in front of a group of bases officers to go through why they weren't able to deal with the injury. Luckily for the researcher, the injury wasn't that severe as it could have been, which meant his or her consequences might not be that severe also. The second bit of poor practice from the testing was that the researcher didn't do a debrief. At the end of every test, there should always be a form of debriefing to focus on the rights and well-being of the participant, to ensure they should feel happy they've contributed, but at the same time to feel obliged to discuss their experience and complete their understanding of what the test is about. It's also a chance for the researcher to explain what he'll be doing next with the data and to reassure them that it will be kept confidential. If not done, it's not a serious legal matter, but it is ethical as a responsible researcher to debrief all participants. Not doing a debrief could lead to uncertainty or doubt from the participants as to what's going to happen next with all their collected data, etc., etc. A consequence of not doing debriefing for the researcher is they might have to receive ethical training to ensure they understand the purpose and importance of debriefing. Consequently, if not doing a debrief, a researcher would most likely need secondly, they might need supervision in their next bit of research to ensure that they don't forget or try to avoid doing a debrief. If they fail to do a debrief twice, this might lead to them facing a formal reprimand, which could involve temporary or permanent suspension. Thirdly, there are some health and safety issues around the fact that the warm-up was cut short for the other participants because of how long it took for the researcher to deal with the injured boy. One of the most important things of research that involves the use of other humans is that you prioritize the health and safety of all the subjects. The researcher must maintain the highest standards as to not endanger participants. Similarly, the researcher should treat all participants the same and only work within the realm of doing things successfully and efficiently. In this scenario, the researcher decided to cut all of the participants' warm-up short because of the time that was spent ensuring that the boy that fell off the treadmill was alright. It's a great thing that he spent a good amount of time dealing with the injured participant, but that doesn't mean that he should compromise the other participants because of it. The researcher must be prepared for the fact that things might pop up that mean the tests might take longer than expected. From cutting their warm-ups short, he's putting his clients' bodies at risk of muscular injury from not doing the right prep before doing quite a strenuous test. If any injuries were to happen, then he would be completely to blame for this, as they are his clients under his responsibility. If someone else was to get hurt, then he could be subject to a tribunal where he could face a fine for the injury of a client. He may also be given a warning that if it was to happen again, he will no longer be able to do research that involves the use of human activity in his research. If no one got hurt, the researcher could still face consequences like needing to face ethical training or supervision during future tests. The final bit of poor practice on this scenario is no respect for the participants. The researchers showing respect to their clients is a huge ethical must during a test. In this situation, one of the participants gives a thumbs down to show that he can't carry on anymore, but the researcher insists that the boy should carry on and says, "Stop being a girl's blouse, you should be doing better than this." Firstly, the researcher isn't giving the boy the right to withdraw, which completely goes against BASI's ethical and legal procedures. But staying on the element of respect, the way that the researcher addresses the boy, calling him a girl's blouse, is going to be really psychologically damaging for the boy. The researcher is also putting the boy down a lot because he is suggesting that the client is weak from telling him that he should be doing a lot better than he is. All researchers should always respect the different levels of fitness of their clients and should make no comment at all that could physically harm and upset them due to their standard or level of ability. In this situation, the researcher should have asked the boy if he wants to stop, and if the boy says yes, he must respect that. In this scenario, this is not done, and therefore the researcher is breaching the element of respect that should be shown to clients. Because of this, the researcher would need to face ethical training to ensure that he gets taught how to treat clients respectfully. Additionally, someone may need to supervise future tests that are conducted by the researcher to ensure that he isn't treating clients with disrespect. So this is the third and final scenario. So there are multiple bits of good practice that I can identify from this scenario. Firstly, there is subject permission to do the tests. When doing any test, the participants must give their permission to do the test. Similar to subject volunteers, a researcher can't force anyone to be part of their research, as this is highly unethical. After a subject gives their permission, an informed consent form would be signed as proof that the client has given their consent to take part in the research. If they were to force anyone, then they could face the consequences of having their BASIS accreditation removed, which will affect them negatively when it comes to doing future research. Secondly, a health screening test is carried out for all participants. This would involve the researcher doing a PAR-Q questionnaire. A physical activity readiness questionnaire is a simple screening tool that must be completed by any researcher before doing a test. It is used as a way to determine the safety or possible risk of doing exercise for an individual based on their health history, common symptoms and risk factors. If an individual was to reply yes to quite a serious question, like do you ever feel dizzy or lose consciousness when exercising, for example, then this person will probably need to go through some medical checks with a doctor before being given the thumbs up to take part in the test. Similarly, the particular individual might not be allowed to take part at all. It must be done as a way of ensuring the health and safety of the participants when conducting the tests. If not done and something was to happen to a client, then that researcher is at extreme risk of a formal reprimand like suspension. They would also possibly be subject to a tribunal where they could face a fine Thirdly, as part of the research protocol, the researcher must include the reasons for terminating the test. This is for the Institutional Ethics and Review Committee to check before they grant ethical clearance that the test can go ahead. For ethical clearance to be granted, multiple other things need to be in place, for example a risk assessment, informed consent, a health screening test, first aid, health and safety procedures. Reasons for termination is also crucial, that is completed in order to be given ethical clearance. Just to note, a researcher cannot complete any tests as part of their research until ethical clearance is given to them. Completing reasons for termination allows for the ethical committee to see that the researcher is aware of the hazards that could occur, and that they will terminate the test if any of these hazards were to occur, over protection of the participants. Another bit of good practice that I can identify is that the researcher has added a subject disclaimer. A subject or participant disclaimer is something that will be signed by the participant or the parents in the situation. It's signed for the protection of the researcher in case an accident was to happen and a participant got hurt. It might read or sound something like this: participants accept that you have understood any potential risk and hazards to participating in the test, taking into consideration any personal medical conditions you may have that could arise during the test. A researcher would be wise not to do a test with a specific client if they do not sign the disclaimer. Finally, researcher responsibility involves the researcher taking full responsibility of the research and their participants. A researcher being responsible will complete the required forms and assessments in order to ensure the health and safety of his clients. They must also be prepared for the fact that they will have to take full responsibility if anything were to happen during the tests, as they are completely responsible for putting the controls in place for any hazards that have been identified. The researcher in the specific scenario isn't showing responsibility in the following bits of poor practice that I've identified. The first bit of poor practice in this scenario is scientific misconduct. The scientific misconduct is the violation of the standard codes of scholarly conduct and ethical behaviour in the publication of professional scientific research. In this situation, the researcher has copied the work of a previous researcher, and this can come under scientific misconduct. A consequence as a result for this for the researcher could be being sued from the original researcher, or they could be temporarily suspended for violation of another researcher's work. This is something that is taken very seriously in sport and exercise science research. The other bit of poor practice in this scenario is no completion of a risk assessment. A risk assessment is a legal requirement that must be reviewed and cleared before any test goes ahead. Risk assessments are completed as a way of identifying any risks to the clients or the trainer before any tests begin. Once the risks have been identified, then solutions should be outlined to show how the risk is going to be avoided. Once the risk has been identified and a control has been put in place, a risk rating will be calculated by multiplying the likelihood of the risk occurring by the severity of the outcome, if the risk was to happen. Both ratings are between 1 to 4, 1 being very unlikely and 4 being very likely. Once these two factors have been multiplied, a risk rating will be accumulated. If the risk rating comes out as 1 or 2, then this means that the measures that have been put in place should be maintained and the test can go ahead. If the rating is 3 or 4, then the control should be reviewed to get the rating down to minimal risk. Furthermore, if the risk rating is 6 or 8, then control measures should be improved and the testing should probably be postponed, as the clients are at high risk of danger or injury during the test. Finally, if the risk rating is 9, 12 or 16, then the control measures should be changed and improved immediately, because this shows there is a very high chance of the hazard